Chief Executive of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. Before we proceed any further, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, the Ngunnawal people of the Ngunnawal Nation. We're delighted as the Australian British Chamber of Commerce to partner with BAE on this event. It's one of a number of events that we're partnering on over the course of this year, one that we held earlier in the year in association with Avalon, and there'll be another one later in the year with Pacific events around September, October time. We've got far more important and interesting people to listen to than me, but I am delighted to introduce the Director of the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, to come and give a formal welcome to the memorial.
Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you for your mercifully short introduction, your leadership of the British Chamber of Commerce, and also, to the extent you had any role in it, deciding to hold the event here today. So thank you very much. I welcome Dr. Ian Watt, who is also a friend, a non-executive chairman of BAE Systems. And to you, Andrew, welcome. I'm glad I'm not here to be interviewed by you. Take that as a compliment. And importantly, the members of the panel who will come up here shortly, and for those of you who are working in this field of disruptive technologies and those things that are related. I often say, David, by the way, without the British and the Germans, we wouldn't exist. So to that extent, we thank Britain. I know some of you here, I see Roxley McClellan, I've seen some former serving personnel that are here. I know for some of you, you are very familiar with this place, and it is your second home in many ways. When visitors come to the Australian War Memorial, as I did with Senator John McCain when he was here just over a week ago, I stand him on the steps of the memorial and I point him down Anzac Parade. And I say to him and others, alongside that parade are memorials to our Vietnam and Korean wars, now our Boer War, our Navy, Army, Air Force. And across the lake there you will see the political capital of our nation, where we exercise our political, economic and religious freedoms. But it's here that you will find our soul. It's here that we reveal ourselves as Australians. It's not the building, nor the artefacts, nor relics that are displayed within it, but instead it's the stories of 2 million Australian men and women who wear and have worn the uniform of our three services. The paradox, as I explain to young people, is it's called the Australian War Memorial, but it's not actually about war. It's in a context of war, but it's actually about friendship. Love for friends and between friends, love of family, love of our country, and honouring men and women, the good and the bad, the great and the small, whose lives are devoted not to themselves but to us and their last moments to one another. When the chief of the Turkish Defence Force stood with me in the commemorative area, that's the area with the pool of reflection in its centre, he pointed to one of the names in bronze where Australians had fought and died over 100 years. And he asked me why Australians had been there. I said to him, General, that's a very important question, because in answering it in your journey of discovery, you'll understand who we are and what makes us tick. Every single government that made those decisions to send Australian men and women to these places, of course, considered our national interest, our alliances, our geostrategic circumstances, but there's something else. And this place, in a direct line of sight from the Parliament itself, reminds us that we are Australians, that there are some truths by which we live and they're worth fighting to defend, politically, diplomatically and at times, sadly, militarily. This place reminds us that we have to ask ourselves what is the right thing to do. The origins in the First World War at Posy Air, a dying Australian, one of our 6,800 dead, of our 23,000 casualties in 6 weeks, asked Charles Bean, the official First World War correspondent, with them at the very front, will they remember me in Australia? And that is our mission. I particularly want to thank BAE Systems for its support You see its signage here in the theatre and you think, oh, that's nice, all that sort of thing. Governments, both sides of politics, have been generous to the Australian War Memorial over the years, even when Dr Watt was the Secretary of the Department of Finance. Was very generous, in fact. The memorial at the time did have some budgetary issues and said it needed an extra $5 million a year. The Department of Finance came in and had a very close look at it and said, no, you're wrong, you need $8.3 million a year extra. So, but the difference between providing something that is outstanding and meaningful for our nation and something that's stunning is the support that we get from companies and individuals like BAE Systems. So thank you very, very much. It means a great deal. Okay, it means a lot to us, but it means much, much more to the people whose emotions are being revealed in our galleries, in our Hall of Memory and the commemorative area. So welcome. Whilst I'm not a disruptive technology, Andrew, I can see that I'm taking up too much time, so I will cease being a human disruptor and let you get on with it. Welcome. Thank you.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Chairman of BAE Systems Australia, Dr Ian Watt. Dr Watt.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, Brendan Nelson, unfortunately has to go, for the warm welcome. This is a special place for, I think, all Australians, and BAE Systems is delighted to support it and has had a long relationship with the War Memorial, and a very good one, and looks forward to a long one in future. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and in the spirit of reconciliation, their elders past and present. I am delighted to be here to start BAE's second panel discussion on disruptive technology. The series is designed to generate a discussion with subject matter experts, and we have our subject matter experts down the front. I'll introduce them in a minute. I promise to say nothing bad about them, so I won't say much at all. The series is designed to get views on disruptive effects of technology, to discuss them, to better understand them, and to come away better informed. And it's a very topical subject, as we all know, and one that we could all stand to be a little bit better informed about it. And we do have a high quality panel, and I want to thank them, and I will again, for their time that they've given us up today. Stuart Mort, Director of Cybersecurity for Optus, Steve Warlock, Director of Project Management and Engineering for BAE Systems Australia and my BAE colleague, and Michael Freeney, Executive General Manager for Process, what is it, Michael? Industries and... Oh, and I can't read my own writing, at Siemens. And of course we have Andrew Green, our facilitator and moderator, who's the National Security and Defence reporter for the ABC. All these people are very well equipped to talk about disruptive technology. Disruptive technology is topical, but it's far from new. As I was driving here today, I wondered if perhaps the first disruptive technology wasn't the use of fire. I wasn't sure whether fire was a technology or an innovation, but it certainly changed things. Maybe it was the wheel, I don't know, but disruptive technologies have been with us for a long period of time. The technological change that was the case in the first industrial revolution in the late 18th century saw a large amount of disruptive technologies. Technologies changes that were disruptive to individuals, to businesses and to nations, just as they are today. What makes disruptive technology of today different from those of the past? Certainly it's the technologies themselves. They're a different set of disruptive technologies. It's the speed of the change, I think, that impresses so many people, how fast it is. It's the fact that it affects not just individual firms or individual cities or towns, but the whole economy or very large slices of it. And it's the fact that it seems to have such a decisive impact in such a short time that makes it different. And it's the ability to rapidly advantage or disadvantage firms, sectors of the economy and nations as a whole that marks out disruptive technology, I think, from that which has occurred in the past. Disruptive technology historically has always had a big impact on national security, particularly in military matters. Think of the machine gun, think of the tank, think of aircraft, think of long-range missiles, think of atomic weapons, and think about how those things have changed warfare and changed it dramatically. And then think about how those things have changed not just warfare, but how we even fundamentally think about war. We are very different for those technologies. They were disruptive technologies. They changed the military business model of the day and changed it fundamentally. Perhaps the only thing you can say standing in this war memorial is sometimes the people who used the military business model didn't change quick enough to adjust to the technologies, much to our great cost over time. And as technologies became more important in warfare, and in national security, so nations have eagerly sought them out. Australia's been fortunate. With the US, with the UK, with Western Europe as our major allies, we've often had access, or usually had access, to the best technologies in the world. We've been very lucky in that respect. But we've also been innovative ourselves. Things like the Jindalee over-the-horizon radar and the Nulka hovering decoy system. These are Indigenous products developed in Australia, Indigenous products that have drawn on the work of what's now the Defence Science and Technology Group, academics, and BAE Systems. And BAE Systems is closely associated, very closely associated with both those things, and has had a long history of doing so and expects to have a long future of doing so. They're great technologies, and in the case of Jawn, they are unique, no doubt about that. Finally, it's funny to think what a wide impact disruptive technologies can have on our society, and in so many unexpected ways. In the early 18th century, early 19th century, Industrial Revolution, there were responses by individuals to modern technologies, what were modern in those times, that led them to be termed machine breakers, rick burners, individuals who looked to protect their employment from the impact of that technology. They were usually caught and tried by British justice, and justice was pretty rough in those days. There was no Fair Work Commission in any sense of the word. Some of them were transported to Australia. And so some of our forefathers were, in fact, people who responded to disruptive technologies and been sent out here for their pains. They do have a very widespread effect, and I don't think that element of our forefathers has any way affected what we do in our own Indigenous technological base here. So before I hand over to our facilitator, I'd just like to thank all those people who've made this possible, to our business partner, the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, to our host this afternoon, the Australian War Memorial, to our panellists for very generously giving up their time, and it's much appreciated, and for all of you for coming along and being willing to participate in the discussion that will follow. Our facilitator is the National Security and Defence Reporter for the Australian Broadcasting Commission. He began his career in commercial radio while at the Seven Network, commercial journalism I should be, while at the Seven Network. He was a finalist in the Walkley Young Journalist of the Year Award there for his coverage of the Navy's HMS Success saga, and a sad saga it was. He, in 2010, joined the ABC, and he's reported from Afghanistan, Iraq, the United States and Europe. Andrew, some of those places aren't very hospitable, and I won't say which ones aren't very hospitable, because the mix does change a bit. He's also reported from across Australia. In 2013, he was based in Prague, covering Central Europe. Nice place, Prague. I wouldn't mind have been based there. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrew Green, our facilitator and moderator, and I'm sure the panel, Andrew, won't need much moderation. Thank you.
Very much. Well, Ian, thank you very much. I will check that everyone can hear at this stage, and I'll probably remain here just for the purposes of facilitating what I will hope will be quite a engaging, lively discussion. First of all, I'll touch on something that Ian has mentioned. We mentioned the United States there, and I think when we think about disruption in a global sense, what we've seen in recent months in the United States has dominated the thinking of almost everyone in this room, I would suspect. I think back to late last year, I was at a gathering of defence people, and we can say that it was a Lockheed Martin gathering, and at the time the President had just fired off a tweet about Boeing, and the big joke in the room was maybe it's time for Lockheed Martin to pitch for the next fleet of Air Force One planes. Sure enough, the next morning another tweet was fired off, and it was squared directly at Lockheed Martin. So that gave a real sense, I thought, in just 1 or 2 days of just how disruptive world events can be in the defence space and on the technology. Ian did also talk about the pace of technology. Perhaps a decade ago in defence planning we talked about 10-year timeframes with white papers, and purchasing decisions were made in much longer periods. That's something of the past these days. We're having to adapt very quickly with our purchasing, and decisions are being made a lot quicker than we saw in the past. There is a focus, of course, under the Turnbull government with innovation and agility, and these are terms I think we will be hearing in the discussion from our expert panels and panellists, and also hopefully yourselves as well. I thought it was probably a good time to just also recap on what disruptive technology is from the government's point of view, and it's something that we have heard defence figures and government talk about in a lot more detail in recent months and years. To quote the Defence Industry Minister, if we look at disruptive technology in a military context, it's best defined as innovation, and the innovation that provides a crucial technological advantage to the warrior. Of course, it also is, in terms of military terms, the advantage that can be given to an adversary. So in our discussion today, we can talk about what adversaries are doing and what Australia can be doing in the disruption space to not only keep up with adversaries but to be indeed ahead of them. Also, as we look at the global security climate and threats, it's clear that disruptive and emerging technological innovation is driving the next generation of modern warfare. If we look at some of the trends that are emerging already in 2017 or even much earlier and look like dominating over the next couple of years, I think we are seeing defence organisations around the world talking more and more about digitisation. They're talking about automation, agility, efficiency, and also looking at how to better exploit information across the entire ecosystems of their organisations into more of a whole force model. I think particularly of the Air Force, some of the exciting things that are being done with Project Jericho and that sort of thing. If we look at a couple of the specifics, communications, I'm sure most of us in our pocket have an iPhone or a phone similar. I think this is going to be a classic example over the next few years where high-end military capability with communications is going to have a much smaller gap with civilian capabilities. I think we're going to see the difference between the capabilities closing rapidly. I think we might today also have a discussion about advanced robotics and particularly the enhanced sensors that we'll be getting in the near future, the dexterity and also the intelligence that we can get from advanced robotics, and also the applications of that, you know, the risks that can now be taken on that perhaps weren't going to be taken on. If we talk about the next century, we can't avoid talking about space, and the disruption options are boundless in space, the disruption options that we can be using and also that potential adversaries can be using when we look at satellites and the devastating impacts that can be done very quickly. Energy storage is something I'd like to hear about today from our panel as well, the rapidly advancing way we can store energy and also transport it and its application on the battle space. We often also hear from people in the Army about super soldiers, some of the technological advancements that are being made even with the human body. And also, I would like to hear about your ideas about the future possibilities. But let's get underway with the panel, and I'll invite them now onto the stage. We have heard already a brief introduction, but we will begin now to get you onto stage. Steve Warlock is the Director of Project Management and Engineering at BAE Systems, and I'll get him to resume his place on the panel. We'll also hear today from Stuart Mort, and a particularly interesting area for Stuart as the Director of Cybersecurity at Optus, a particularly timely topic, cybersecurity. And thirdly and finally, Michael Freny from the Executive General Manager of Process and Industries and Drives and Digital Factory at Siemens. So welcome to our panel, all three. Now, a very broad question. I think we'll start broad and start to delve into project areas. Firstly, with yourself, Stuart. When we look at trends, what are the perhaps one or two defining trends that you're going to be working with, you think, over the next 2 years in terms of disruption?
Well, I mean, I would say that we kind of look at this in different levels to start with. So at a platform level, we certainly see things globally. I mean, in many ways, I would argue that the trends are repeating themselves in terms of taking design information from a platform elsewhere, Australianising that, building it, and then through life being able to upgrade that with what I would say is where the disruption really comes in. That you may not do it at a platform level holistically, but it's the ability to keep that platform through life and bring disruption to it on a repeat basis. And that is where I think, personally, we'll see that advancing. I mean, certainly, at a lower level, then we're into discrete technologies. And some of those technologies, you're at the tipping point throughout the world globally. If we took something like additive manufacture, it's maybe 5 years ago, I come from a background of not adding material, but taking it away. And really, did I believe that we would be where we are now, maybe even 5 years ago, or certainly before that? And now, I would say we've reached a tipping point where all players globally are actively taking part. And of course, as soon as you get that tipping point and you've got the bright minds globally, whether it's academia or industry, but many nations, you then solve all aspects of this, and all of a sudden, it really does take effect. And, I've lived through that, through the digital world in aircraft manufacture and design. And what we're about to see is that take off again in that's an example. I mean, there's other examples, but I would say, what we try to do is back winners. I mean, because there's so many, the pace of change is so great that what we're trying to do is see where things are sort of additive across different technologies to bring something to bear. And I'm sure we'll end up talking about that. But just to give two examples, I mean, we certainly would be looking at the platform level and at discrete technology level, and there's just two examples.
Now, Steve, you did talk about history repeating itself.
Yeah.
When we look at history, what are those lessons that we can learn from history as we approach a period that you and others in this room have said will have unprecedented pace?
Okay, I mean, if I was to pick a topical example, one that we've been involved in heavily, I would take the history of ANZAC. Mm-hmm. So the history of ANZAC is, a German design built in Australia and happened to also be built partly in New Zealand. That class of ship has been upgraded several times. We're just about to upgrade it again with the latest capability, phased array radar from Australia, from CA, so indigenous capability from Australia, weapons from Australia, Nulka decoy, the latest capability. And that's the second turn of that dice. Now, in terms of how do you learn from that? If, for example, to the future of, say, C5000, which I believe will follow a similar model, then it's all about pace. So, for example, Arunta is going to be on the hard stand in Henderson in September. We've got 12 months to do everything on that ship. All the platform system upgrades to give more capability, all the weaponization improvements, all the radar improvements, and all the maintenance within a 12-month period for first of class. That is pretty much unheard of, I would say, in my platform life. And I've been, lucky to be involved for about 39 years in platform sort of development and sustainment. So the speed at which we need to get stuff onto a platform to provide it operationally is quickening. And I'd say the lessons from the past are how to do that in a way that is reliable. How can you do that where you do what you can, but it's a risk and reward, and sometimes you actually have to be prepared to say no, even to the customer, and say, well, what can be achieved within that period of time reliably to give you a capability that's reliable. So that is a fine balance, I would say, because of the complexity involved.
Now, Stuart, if we talk disruptive technology, there perhaps is no greater area of industry than cyber when we think of disruptive. Give us a broad picture of the industry. And from a public sense, we're seeing evidence of the disruption, but how is industry responding to that, and what are the trends in perhaps the next year?
Yeah, security and disruption are uncomfortable bedfellows. We kind of think that we've just secured something and we've got it all nice and everybody's operating within this controlled environment, and something else comes along. Let's throw out data in the cloud, for example, and then we've got to scramble and work with that new sort of ruffled landscape that we've now got to protect. But that's actually the mindset we want to take. So as technology moves forward, we in security cannot be the barriers. We need to be the guardrails. The business is going to adopt this disruptive technology. We need to go with it. But I kind of want to echo what Steve says a little bit. One of the terms I like to use is same suite, different wrapper. We're hearing about ransomware attacks at the moment. They were around 25 years ago, being distributed on floppy disks. It's nothing new. People look at the attacks on SCADA systems. You had one in Australia many years ago where dam water was released. But where are we going in the future? Everything's connected. Everything's now a target. A conversation I had with a head of security of a mining plant said, hey, we're not worried about cyber. We're not worried. We ship product. You want to get intel on our organization, go down and look at the manifests at the dockyard, see what we're loading onto ships. That's changed now. The conveyor belts are now being run by IT, operational technology. They're interconnected over the air. So I can pick up those signals and attack conveyor belts. I can attack, unmanned diggers, etc. They're all a great example recently. Someone put a toaster on the internet. So the Raspberry Pi chips, they connected to the toaster, plugged it onto the internet. It was on 20 minutes before it was hacked. So, you can't even make your toast in the morning without being, disrupted by a cyber attack. You look at medical devices, that's another area of interest. We know that there's an insulin pump that's been released, that's attackable over the air. You can change the prescribed doses of insulin by attacking that. So as we go to more interconnected devices, and I started my career in defense as a scientist many years ago. I think about these battleships coming on board. That's information warfare right there. I might not have to attack that ship with my missiles, but I can attack it with my cyber geeks. If I can get a connection into that, I can attack it. I started in cyber 25 years ago, and my title was information warfare. So same suite, different wrapper. And we've got the longest range attack platform now. It's not your intercontinental ballistic missile or whatever the most modern thing is. It's your hacker, it's your cyber team. They can attack from anywhere. And they can attack different technologies. You think about the Cobra War Room, which is scrambling in the UK. They'll probably have a television in there. We know that Samsung TVs have been infiltrated by US intelligence and can turn into microphones. So cyber can help as sort of a war machine, if you want, from the intel perspectives, from turning your devices into listening devices. And as you referenced, it's in your pocket. That's now my boundary I have to protect. I don't have a network anymore. You're all carrying my network around in your pocket. Thank you very much. And so, that we can help with the intel, and then we can, on the go forward, if we can disrupt that technology in some way that defends the war fighters, the guys and girls at the sharp end, then that's information warfare.
And thirdly and finally, we'll bring in Michael into this discussion, and continuing on the digital theme. Michael, you have no doubt also seen evidence of this rapid change technologically, but also in the disruption space. Give us some of your outlooks at Siemens and where you're seeing some of the future challenges and perhaps opportunities also for Australian industry.
Yeah, maybe I can take you back to the early 2000s, where we as Siemens, we manufacture ourselves all over the world in different places of many of products. And in 2005, we realized basically, the traditional methods of driving improvement of our products weren't good enough to compete with the lead cost countries from the East. So we took a leap of faith and said, well, we need to think differently about the life cycle cost of products. And we said, well, we need to start from the design of the product to the design of the manufacturing, to the actual manufacturing execution, and to the life cycle of the product. And with new technologies being available, software, communication, sensors, we saw a great opportunity to change the playing field. And by doing that, for example, in our factory in Germany, we have now maintained the amount of people that we deploy in the factory, but we have increased the output 8 times over 20 years. So I think that's where digitalization really makes a difference. You start your design not on a computer. You test everything on a computer. And some of you will say, well, that exists already 20 years ago. The difference is we use the same software input all the time once. We have one platform, one software platform. So you take your design tools, you take the data, you simulate it mechanically, electrically. And you test it until you have the desired features that you want. Once you have this, we call it the digital twin of your product. Once you have the digital twin of your product, you start designing the manufacturing. Again, in the virtual world. So how is the product designed? How has it to be produced? Do you use robots? Do you use humans? You continue this process. And once you have done this, once again, all the virtual world, you can even do the commissioning in the virtual world. And then you start investing into your equipment and then you set it up. And that has a significant impact on time to market. And secondly, with the amount of data that you have, you're way more flexible in your production. And the third part then of the life cycle is you can take then actual production data, feed it back into what we call the digital twin of your product or the digital twin of your manufacturing, and continue to optimize constantly your facilities. And just to give you an example, Germans are always in cars, right? So I have a car example. Maserati actually was working with us together.
You've got a Maserati?
No, I didn't get a Maserati. I need to ask for a pay raise, I think. But Maserati was, challenging us and saying, well, we want to come up with a new car and we want to be faster. What technologies can we use? And we worked very close together. And from the idea to the actual car, first car produced, it was 15 months. And that was 30% faster than anybody else so far. And the factory they produce now 3 times the amount of cars which they have done before. Plus they have a variety of 70,000 cars that they can produce, all in one. So, and I think it's a pretty nice car, Maserati Ghibli, and whoever wants to have a test drive, go do it. It's all done with our technology. But I think that's a disruption that you can see, and that's the opportunity that you have with digitalization or Industry 4.0 and communication and sensors. You have this really great improvement in productivity and time to market. And that's why I would call it a disruption.
Well, Michael has touched on a topic that I do want to go to the panel with, and that is the future of employment and the disruptive areas there. But at this point, I would like to also invite the audience, if anyone does have questions. We have a couple of roving microphones, and if you're able just to raise your hand, we can get that discussion underway. But while we're waiting for people to come up with their own comments and questions, can I first, from each of you, get a brief idea of what you're predicting, perhaps crystal ball gazing into employment? It's something that Michael did touch on, but perhaps first with you, Steve.
I think it depends how far you look. If you look beyond the here and now, I would say we're just at the beginning of a new demographic revolution worldwide. Significant changes in what's happening. And what do I mean by that? Worldwide birth rates are crashing through the floor. There's an aging population pretty much in all parts of the world. And if you put that in context, that means from the employment point of view, we're going to have to think about new ways of doing things. And if we just look at the pipeline, the young pipeline end of it, it's very clear that that is not going to cut the requirement for sustaining the economic capability of pretty much any nation. Even if you look at India, China, starting to face the same problem. Europe, Japan, already in slight decline because of that particular issue. Certainly I think there's a need for a new way of thinking, and I think technology comes into bear. So, how you do agile working, which we're all using more and more because of the potential of using devices and working not necessarily at a fixed location. But I think it's a bit more complicated than that. So if you're working in a complex organization on a complex program, you've now got to think about how you do the overall organization of that in a different way than perhaps was done with co-located teams, IPTs, all the, what we've been used to over the recent times. So I think we're just starting to enter into a much more demanding phase in terms of how we deliver capability, whether it's a company level, project level, or even at a national level. We're going to probably have to look at how we address the wants and needs of people. So, will individuals want to work for a single company? Will companies actually want fixed employees? I would argue if you go forward not too far into the distance, that is going to radically change. And therefore, technology and partitioning of information and all those sort of things, and IPR and all of the safeguards around it, I think are going to have to change. Because the simple numbers, I can look at our demographic, I could look at probably Siemens, wherever, or Defence Force, and we will see the same thing. So, to my mind, we are facing a much more complicated picture than perhaps we are just teetering on at the moment, which we still think is quite challenging. It's going to be much different in the future. That's my take on it.
And Stuart?
I'll talk from the cybersecurity perspective, and we're terribly understaffed in cyber. There is a skills shortage across the industry completely. So if you look at the designs we're talking about, we need to embed security from the ground upwards. We're currently trying to mold security around products and systems already developed. We need security people at that blueprint stage, and we just don't have the human resources to be able to do that. We're struggling to recruit in the industry. We're struggling to bring people into Optus who have the right cybersecurity skills. So we're trying to drive initiatives that will, get people, hey Jim, what do you want to do when you grow up? It's not like doctor, lawyer, engineering.
Wrong word.
There's cyber in there as well. There's cyber in there as well. We also need to change the language of cyber. It's not a technology field. Technology is a heavy part of it. We're about risk. And so what we also want to do is try and attract people from other industries, legal backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, who have a risk mindset and draw them into cyber and not try and think that it's a purely technology industry. It's not. It's about people, it's about processes, and technology is just one of those arms. So we need to really drive this education system to get people attracted into cyber. In terms of the technology workplace, I think what we're going to see is a shift where large companies are going to realize that they're not an IT company. You look at some of the banks, for example, they've got huge IT and huge cybersecurity resources in the bank. They're suddenly going to realize that they're not an IT company and they can buy those resources in. The cloud's a great example of disruptive technology that's shrinking the size of IT departments. It's the IT people who just shift and work for the cloud providers. They've still got plenty of jobs out there. But it allows the industry, then the business itself, to take that headcount and invest it into more innovation, more salespeople, more dollars to drive the business. And you're going to see the technology companies come to the fore and grow. So in terms of cyber, huge shortage, and we need to address it now. Otherwise, we're going to end up with all those insulin machines and conveyor belts, and they're going to be, and maybe battleships, and they're all going to be wide open to attack.
And you have touched on another topic that I'm sure we will get to, which is education. I think that will be a key area that will need to be addressed as we look to employment. And Michael, before we do go to the audience, your thoughts on future employment and the way disruptive technologies can affect it.
I wanted to say, is anybody a data scientist in the audience? No? If you have sons and daughters, make them data scientists, because I think that's one of the most desired job that we all look for currently and need resources. But what I wanted to start with is, it starts with us. Even for me, seasoned, I can say, well, I cannot live with the knowledge I have for the rest of my career. And probably, without digitization, where I'm coming from, automation, electronics, the actual life cycle of a product is 10 years, roughly. In digitization, the lifetime of products is 3 to 5 years. So I think it starts with us that we need to learn constantly about the new technologies. If I go to a customer, want to sell them something, suddenly I'm faced with questions about cybersecurity. Did I know about it? Did I learn at the university about it? No, I didn't. So I think the first part is very important for all of us and all of us managers. We need to be the role model in constant learning. And the cycles of innovation have become much shorter than in the past. The next one, as I said, is we do, you said on education, we are anyhow coming through that. Digitization has no borders. I think that's a very important thing that we all need to think of. You can sit in Germany, you can sit in China, you can sit in Australia and work today on collaborative design teams. We do this in Siemens. We just have developed a product here in Australia for the rest of the world with one of our engineers. Great idea. Yes, there were some business trips to Germany. Okay, I get it. But I think it wouldn't have been possible 15 years ago. And I think that's a great opportunity for Australia with many smart people, as somebody said already, great ideas. You can participate in the value chains everywhere in the world now. It doesn't have to be the island it has been before 20 years ago. And I think that's a great opportunity of digitization. On the other hand side, of course, there will be competition from all over the world, right, coming in. But for me, and probably I can say it coming from Germany, I see great potential here, great opportunity.
Well, at that point, I will throw it open to our audience members, and I can see a hand going up here. Might get you to introduce yourself and direct your question.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Darren Bradley. I'm with BAE out of our U.S. division. What I was surprised with was is that what I hadn't heard is not working. Working better. All right. In our division, what we consider to be the most disruptive technology on the horizon is something that I haven't heard anybody in the panel address yet. I was just looking to see if they'd had any views on it, which was artificial intelligence and machine learning. In our area where we talk about intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, command and control, that's really the holy grail at this point. So I was looking to see if anybody had any views on that.
That is actually, when we think disruptive technology, perhaps one that leaps to mind first for a lot of people. And I look also at the unmanned aerial vehicles and the talk of more autonomy and more AI in that. Perhaps first to you.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't see it as I don't see it as disruptive in the way you describe it. I mean, if I take three components, artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomous vehicles. In their own right, they've been developed significantly over quite a long period of time, and I won't go into that because we all know examples of that. I think what's different now is one can see they've developed to a level of maturity in their own right, where if you then add those things together, you're going to see big things happen. And we're already seeing that operating theatres. And it's not going to be too long. I would say in the decade, we'll see, robotics with all of those components in the street. It's going to be very, very common. So the bit I would say that I would argue, is disruptive isn't the individual component. I think it's where you make those connections, and all of a sudden, the compounding effect of that makes lots of things possible, and I could add to that optics and sensors and smell and all of those sort of communication, artificial language interpretation, all of those components. I guess on the sort of challenging side, I don't see the technology as being necessarily the challenge, but I see the protocols as being a challenge, because, you know, when that really takes off, and it is accelerating, you know, you're into all sorts of dimensions that I guess we might end up talking about at some point, which is, you know, safety, regulatory frameworks, ethics. And I think those are the bits that is going to be pretty disruptive. You know, I don't see the technologies particularly disruptive. I see it's the bits around the edges, how it affects us, you know, and you know, mankind as being the difficult thing, and how you manage that in a way that's positive. So, you know, that's my interpretation of that particular issue.
And Stuart or Michael, do you have any views on the importance of AI in disruptive technology?
Yeah, certainly from the security perspective, we can use artificial intelligence to hunt down the vulnerabilities that they are inherently coded into by accident, maybe deliberately by foreign states, into software programs. That's our biggest attack vector at the moment, is bad coding within our software products. You look at the WannaCry outbreak, you look at most attacks on systems, they're targeting vulnerabilities that are being designed, you know, program coded in by humans. So I guess my fear from a security perspective with AI is if the AI is coded badly in some way, will that insecurity mature with the AI itself and then always be vulnerable? So I think in terms of the process aspect, I think we need tighter coding standards and how we develop that AI in a manner that we don't, you know, bake in vulnerabilities and security problems with them.
I think it's a big thing. It's going to come. We are working with this, so we are testing it out in our own facilities to protect pattern or to detect patterns, and, you know, describe what should be then the process automatically executed. I can just say, yeah, it will be a big thing.
Okay, well, I'll give the audience an opportunity too, if anyone has a burning question or comment even on what we've discussed so far, if you're able to raise your hand. There was an area that I thought we should also, is the hand up there? No, I'm sorry, no, I misread it. Oh, yep, but if we could just get a microphone perhaps to the gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Michael Wilson from BAE Systems. I guess it builds a little bit on the last conversation, which was, as you see technology integrating with people, what are your thoughts around building consumer trust as new products or services start to evolve?
That is something when we look at the erosion of trust in all spheres of society, government and consumerism. Is that something that has come across your desk, this idea of trying to win the consumer trust?
Probably not, you know, trying to win consumer trust, but certainly in my area of work, one of the areas that I specifically have responsibility for is safety, you know, product safety. And as already has been mentioned, you know, risk around cyber and the advances in technology means that our approach to, for example, safety cases for, you know, our products has become more complicated. And certainly, you know, you get closer to understanding the risks around that and the hazards, which are much more, it's kind of unusual. You know, they go beyond the engineering, and they you know, you have to understand them in the context of modern life and the threats that are out there. So I think it's certainly, I wouldn't say necessarily I've had to involve myself in winning trust. As I said before, I do think with some developments, we're going to get into the ethical boundary, the regulatory frameworks, you know, are going to have to be worked out pretty quickly before certain products come to market. And you know, you could, you know, predict certain areas where it really needs a strong look at. And quite a large number of countries are already well down the path of looking at regulatory frameworks for things like, you know, artificial intelligence, the development of robots, and all of that. You know, it's already on the agenda. So I suppose my particular area is safety and how you protect you know, the customer and your workforce and the user in terms of the products going forward. That is becoming more complicated.
And of course, adversaries don't necessarily have to deal with regulatory frameworks.
Correct.
Yeah.
And to you, Stuart, is that?
Yeah, I think there's huge amount of trust in the consumer space already. And who's got a cell phone, to use the American term? Who's got Android? Yeah. Android rock. Who's poor cousins with their apples? Yeah. How many of you really rely on that device to run your day-to-day, your emails, your calendars, your social media, your photos, right? How many of you read your end-user license agreement when you turned on the device? Right, there's
Show
the
of
trust
hands on that one.
right? You've got trust already built in with your devices you use. You know, you don't.
And is that misplaced trust?
It's like it could well be, but if you read most, especially software licenses, it's the one area where they can't be held liable for errors or failures in safety on those products. You have no, you know, you can't take your code back to the shop and get your money back on it. So I think there's a huge trust already. And I think it'll take a lot to erode that trust because we want that tech, we want that newest, greatest, shiniest.
And this is something I'm sure Michael can also comment on, but we'll get a question here from this lady.
Hi, I'm Neha from BAE Systems. My question was, what is the impact of this technology? Now that we've spoken about the customer trust and evolving technology, what is the impact? Because we're going to talk about the education later, but I'm just coming from that angle and saying, how do we see the impact of evolving technology and bringing this disruptive technologies or AIs to education and in general?
So the impact of disruptive technology on the future education.
Like Stuart was talking about, we all have Apple iPhones, we rely on it the whole day. And if you see the kids of this generation, they can even use the technology as good as like an adult. So I'm just thinking, what's the impact? How do we see this going?
It's a very good question to the panel. Anyone want to tackle it?
I can something about Apple iPhones or Android iPhones, but I can just say how digital technology can help creating trust in users. And I can give you an example. You know, Siemens is also building trains, and we have provided high-speed trains between Madrid and Barcelona. And the train takes 2 hours 30, and the plane takes 1 hour 20. So, you know, there's an exact competition. And so the railway company was talking to us and saying, well, you know, to be competitive, we need to give some grant. Can you help us? And they came up with the statement to the customers and saying, well, if you're 15 minutes late, you get your full fare back. And I can say in 2,200 connections, it only happened once. The point was behind it and saying, so how do we make the asset really always available? And we take a lot of data points from those trains constantly and monitor everything. And we can, for example, say that 3 days in advance now, if the train has to go into a service and you have to check the brakes or the gearboxes or the doors. So, you know, their technology really has helped become more competitive and reliable to the customer.
Okay, question from the gentleman here.
Hello. Hello, I'm George Bell from the Australian National University. I teach marketing. There's a link, obviously, between the military technologies that you're talking about, disruptive technologies, and consumer products. So I think of drones, driverless cars, as being something that's going to shape our future. That will also shape our sense of ownership. I don't think we actually need to own things anymore to a large extent. Have you got any sort of comment from BAE or any of the organisations like Siemens or Optus about the total cost of ownership of the new disruptive technologies?
I mean, you know, I can just say, you know, it's still in our mind, but you're absolutely right. We are still selling product, and digitalization also enables us to go to different business models. So, you know, we are selling into mining, electrical motors and gearboxes and all those kind of things. We are thinking about models where we say, well, probably we can sell you crushed rock. Because, you know, with the technology that we have, we can say, well, we guarantee the uptime, we guarantee the output. So there will be new business models. I agree with you. That's the next thing we are thinking of. Yeah.
It extends across business as well, I think. You know, you don't own your carrier anymore. You lease, you know, airtime or cable time off Optus. You lease your broadband off Optus. If you're with Telstra, leave, come to Optus, do you a deal. And so you're renting that. If you expand that then to the compute within businesses, that's leased now. That's OPEX, not CAPEX now. You look at your storage, you're in the cloud, you're leasing that. And marketing as well. You know, you can go to marketing companies who will mine social media and give you excellent campaigns at a click of a button, you know, marketing in the cloud, marketing as a service. So we're leasing more and more. I think we're also leasing our privacy in some respects as well, the way we go around with social media. And I think that links in with the question earlier, which is, you know, are people so worried about privacy anymore? The amount that's communicated on social media and what you can track. So yeah, I think ownership is going less and less. We're releasing businesses, leasing more and more. We lease our cars, we don't own them anymore.
Can I have a supplementary question? Yeah. It comes to the ethics of being in a driverless car. If you are in a driverless car, who's responsible if there's an accident?
Ethics generally with artificial intelligence.
If you're from New South Wales, it's always the cyclist. Okay?
It's very different in Canberra. It can double. To you, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I try and pick up on the example in defence. Okay, so it's already the case that, you know, most contracts have got KPIs rather than, you know, just delivering something. It's already the case that industry, you know, not just BAE, but generically, is looking after assets for defence. You know, if I take the example of our Hawks at Williamtown in Newcastle, you know, we put Hawks on the line, fueled up, we strap pilots in, and they do their training. We do the whole thing. We do the repairs, we do the deeper maintenance. We're even projecting what needs to be done and when, you know, in terms of reliability data. So that is not actually new. That's real life today. So the need to own things, even at a defence level, is changing. I think the bit where we probably need to develop further, which is more about, I would say, trust. I would say it's about having national champions to some degree in certain areas, not all, is, you know, if you're competing that continuously, that might affect the way, as a company, you think about your investment into the long term. So clearly, I think in some niche areas, what it does require is a change in how one operates for the longer term. Because, you know, the more certainty you have as business, the more you put in at the front end, because you amortize it over the long term. So I don't think, at the moment, I would say in the defence sector, we're already transitioning into a new world. It's not that new. But the mechanisms around it need to catch up with the full potential of those models. And I'm sure, you know, there's a different package for different aspects of the total requirement. You know, it's not one size fits all. But where you're talking about sovereign capability, you need to think really long term and think about, therefore, how can you ensure this disruptive technology comes on board in the best way over the long term, not just for the next 5 years, and then we're going to do something different for the next 5 years. To me, that's discontinuities that are very unhelpful. So I think there's quite a long way to go in the defence world, not in the aspiration, but in the actual application of all the methodologies and some of the responsibilities. So, you know, the responsibility for the ethical side of things. You know, I think it's a big area for further discussion and further development. That's my own view.
And Steve, thank you for using the term sovereign capability, because that is something I think we should perhaps touch on as well. Having a question from the ANU prompts me also to look at the role of academia and how it can work with government and industry. Do any of you have any particular thoughts on what academia in the Australian context could be doing to help the battle for disruption and keeping ahead?
We, for example, work together with Swinburne University. We just started an apprenticeship for Industry 4.0 education. just to put really a foot forward and saying, okay, how can we help to work together with education on how do we build the skills for the next workforce? So I think we are very much into it. Not only complaining like we always do, we don't have the right people, we academia or government needs to do something. Actually, it's also on us to really do something about it, and also invest into the future technology and into the future of the people. Stu?
Yes, we're investing very heavily in it. We've invested $10 million in Macquarie University to build a cyber hub. We're partnering with Data 61 as the commercial sponsor to go after some of the cyber budgets in government. That won't come to us, that will go to Data 61. But where I see my role playing is I want the academics to, in my view, they can be deep and narrow, and I want them to come out and spend time with us on the front line dealing with cyber problems. Come into our Advanced Security Operations Centre where we're servicing the security for Australia's top companies and see what it's like, the problems we face, the risks we face or companies face, and then take that back into the labs and help develop the next generation of products within Australia to make Australia a competing force in the cyber market. There's lots coming out of the US, there's lots coming out of Israel. I think Australia can be a leader, and we see that. So we want to develop the talent as well as develop the research that can help drive industry and drive the security industry forward. I should mention La Trobe as well. We're partnering with La Trobe as well, so I don't want them to feel left out.
I might get a microphone first to you, sir, and then to Catherine at the front.
Yeah, Wing Commander Mark Washington, Chief Engineer for the Dawn radar. How do you best go about anticipating what the next big disruptor is going to be so as you can either effectively exploit it or, if needs be, guard against it?
That's a very good question.
Well,
Very good question. Who wants to take that on?
Hack them. Just hack them or something.
who wants that one?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my starting point would be to assume an asymmetric type situation. So, I mean, for not everybody that may be, so sort of well looking at this particular aspect, for a long time, Cold War onwards, really it was about the same type of capability and just advances in military capability between nations. I think now that is changing rapidly, and it's, you may have a particular capability and your opposition is where your threat may have something completely different, which I think probably is where you're headed. I'm not sure it's so easy to fully predict. I mean, I think there are certain lines of development on the different technology threads. So, if we were to consider all the technology threads, and some of these threads are in areas that are not, they're not mechanical, they're not electrical, they're maybe bio, they're maybe in sort of complete adjacent domains that we're not used to dealing with. But if you think wide enough, and then you think about the way that those technology threads are developing, I think you then can perhaps, and I've kind of alluded to this, join the dots. And at that point, you can see that then becomes a threat, whether it's surveillance, all sorts of different mechanisms that you could perhaps see the potential around that and the level of risk. I think to some degree it's about picking winners, and because I think there will be permutations of this, N by N as it were, but it's all about picking winners. That would be the way I would describe it. Do we actually do that as an industry? I think in part, perhaps, with the growth of asymmetric threat, perhaps that's an area where there needs to be more collaborative discussion on where we see these combined threats.
And how do we increase the chances of picking a winner?
Yeah.
I've got a sort of slightly different sort of idea, and I'm going to reference my mother, who's an avid book reader and a career librarian. And she said, whatever's going to happen in the future has been written about in fiction. So I just wonder if you can turn to the fiction writers and have a look at what's coming out of there and look at the future, because you do see that pattern in many things. For example, in the security field, go and read Neuromancer from William Gibson years ago, talked about black ice, where we actually plug into the internet, if you want, through your brain, and then if you attack something, you're actually neutralized by black ice. So, that's what I'm looking for. That's my disruption security. But it's maybe look at fiction and see what's going to come down the line from the Those are the great minds, right?
And we know how much librarians hate disruption. I might get a...
I was thrown out for talking.
Yeah. Might get a question from Catherine, or comment.
Thanks, gentlemen. Catherine Ziesing, Australian Defence Magazine. Last year, the Chief Scientist for Australia released a report which outlined that there are over 120 different STEM programs running nationally to try and grow that new workforce that will use STEM skills. In your experience, in a corporate sense, what does a successful STEM program look like? What are your KPIs there?
And other STEM programs meeting industry's demands?
Okay. Shall we go? From my perspective, I think a couple of standouts. I would say a program that changes the sort of view of what engineering is all about. So from the dirty end of what engineering, the vision of engineering, to a brand that is actually not like that at all, is more interesting, it requires a higher level of sort of intellect participation, and so changing the view of what engineering is all about. I think we still suffer from a legacy of engineering is grease and dirt and grime, and I think that it hasn't been like that for a very long time. Or even though components of that are still valid today. When I'm not at work, I'm messing around with engines and stuff like that. So it's not to say I don't like it, but I think a program has to, if you're going to attract young people into science and engineering, you've got to show them the potential of that, which appeal. What will appeal is, I think, different to the past. I also think a successful program is one that is gender neutral. We happen to put a lot of our effort into the robotics side of STEM. First Lego League, First Robotics Challenge, which is a global competition you've perhaps heard of, and we sponsor that across a number of states. We do that because it appeals to everybody equally. It involves every dimension you can imagine. It's a challenge. It requires project management. It requires participation as a team. It covers everything from software, computing, mechanics, electrics, the whole, mechanics, the whole works in those solutions. And that's why we kind of like that. But there's other opportunities as well. And I would say those two things, changing the view of what engineering is all about and actually getting a good equal participation.
I think diversity is key, particularly in the cyber area. We do with more women in cyber. There's various initiatives running. There's a huge Women in Cyber initiative run at Cisco Live. So diversity, yes. I think a marker for a successful STEM program is when parents are advising their children to choose a career in the STEM field. That's the marker. It's as I said before, it's like go-to, doctors, lawyers, all that type of stuff. It'd be good if they, the diversity of STEM subjects was actually the parents are saying, have you thought, from my field, have you thought about a career in cyber? It's not going away. It's going to be there. It's going to be around a long time, pursue that career. I think that would be the mark for me. Parents encouraging their children to go into those careers.
And as we heard, to get into data science as well.
And go into
the data scientist is a good job. Now, I want to pick up something Stuart mentioned last time. The practical part. Coming from Germany, I know, we had always university students in our offices, in our factories. There's holiday season in Germany in summer between July and August, and I remember one of our factories at this point in time always took in 300 students to do some of the work. So I think what a good program could look like and what could really help is having the theoretical part and the actual part. I would 100% agree. I think that was one of the success factors that I at least observed in Germany. Because they know exactly what you work about. And the good thing about the young people is they already think differently. I always felt like it's a great atmosphere in working with those gray-haired, experienced people and the young ones that challenge status quo. On the other hand side, you can give them guidance. And I think it's a great mixture. And out of this mixture, you can get a lot of. So I felt like that was very useful in Germany for us to progress.
Something we're going to hear more about up the back now, and then we'll come further down the front.
Hi, my name is Patrick Kennedy from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. But I just wanted to touch on something that you'd brought up just in passing about the biotechnology side of things. So a lot of the disruptive technologies we've been talking about have been more digitally focused. And like you say, there's a bit of a template to think about that from past experience. But probably commensurate with artificial intelligence is CRISPR and some of the gene editing technologies and so on. I was just wondering the extent to which you thought you could think about disruptive technologies in different domains in the same way, or if there were points of differentiation and so on.
Yeah, genomics, has anyone got thoughts there? I know it's a little bit away from your area, but...
Maybe you should come here.
Yeah.
yeah. What's your thoughts? Yeah.
Is you know, at ASPI, is this something you've looked at?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm looking at it briefly now, but it was something that I sort of had to push a bit for coming into it, into the organisation. And it concerned me a little bit just because for something that will have like really wide-ranging effects on all of society, but even how we think about ourselves as humans and how we can control evolution and how we can interact with the environment, not least also more direct national security implications, like the risk for more pandemics or souped-up super soldiers, like you mentioned before. Like this is the kind of technology that enables all of that, but it just strikes me that people don't talk about it or know about it as much as we might artificial intelligence or something like that.
yeah, and it is a discussion, certainly from my experience, that Army is starting to have, but perhaps it's a wider discussion in the public and in industry that may not be quite at that level. I might come down further to a lady who had a question. Lost you there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Priscilla Canjon. I'm from the Australian National University. I'm a researcher in information systems. I actually studied computer science and my PhD was in artificial intelligence. And I also work in the space of trying to bring industry and academia to work together. So a few mix of comments and questions here. So we are actually working with a defense science and technology group on a trusted autonomy project around looking at the formation, the implication of hybrid teams of using machines and humans and how best to leverage that. So it's a complex issue, and I think a few of the panel members have touched on it. The artificial intelligence community started in the 70s, and it's only really now that the capability has caught up to allow us to do so many different things. So it's the age of the rise of the machines, and we need to remember the human element. So I have a question around there. How do you keep track of the human element for the panel? But before going to that, in terms of the industry collaboration bit, we're setting up an innovation hub at the ANU. And so the defence project is part of that. We're working with them on that. We're also working with Sydney Trains to look at how to leverage data analytics to prevent suicide on the railway. We're working with SAP on the design of digital nudges and pulling in data analytics to devise user-centric solutions. So we'd be very interested to look at partnering with more institutions. Also, in terms of STEM, we have in the Innovation Hub, we've got an entrepreneurs space for our students and also teaching space, and we've got a behavioural lab. So you talked, Stuart, about bringing things into the lab and then out again for testing and back in. So we're trying to work in that space and work closer with industry to bring that. So my question, how do you bring in the human element and make sure we, in the age of a machine where you're delegating more to your machines and trusting, so perhaps when you have someone in a fighter plane you're trying to feed them information to make that decision to drop the bomb or fire, who's responsible and how do you make sure that decision has been taken with the right sort of mechanism in place?
So we're straying back into ethics as well here. Yeah, who wants to take that on?
Well, I mean, I would say that's part of the big challenge because, you know, the rate of change and, you know, what it comes down to is, you know, you need protocols. You need frameworks on which you can do that, whether it's for the warfighter, there's already protocols. And I would guess part of the challenge of going to completely unmanned vehicles is, can you still maintain the actual flexibility and agility as opposed to a manned product? And that's always been a bit of a wrestle, even in modern times, even though the capability to do it is there and has been there for quite a long time. But I would say there does need to be a lot of further development around the protocols and ethics of developing artificial intelligence and robotics and all of that type of area, because otherwise it probably will get very uncontrolled. That would be my honest belief. And I think it would, it would not be a good outcome. Whether that's feasible is another matter. Whether it's feasible to bring, to maintain a level of control over that, or whether the speed of change and the ability for many organisations to use these technologies, you could question whether it is feasible to maintain that control. I'm not so sure. But, a lot of countries are thinking about it at the moment.
Stuart, on the human element?
Yeah, people have asked me many times, how can I deliver a secure environment? And I say, yep, I can deliver you a secure environment if I can remove the carbon unit that's been between the chair and the keyboard, right? So, humans are always my problem. So, get them out and I'll get you a secure environment. I can only talk from the cyber perspective, certainly not from flying planes. Yeah, they're always good. That interface is always going to be the weak spot for any compromised environment. If I want to target your company or your university, I'm going to target you, not your technology. And so, from that perspective, I'll social engineer you. I used to teach hackers how to social engineer. It's a great skill. They're actually very good at it. They're not so good face-to-face, but over the telephone, they're actually very good at developing personas. So, that's the weak spot for me. But also, just on that point, aren't we there already with some fly-by-wire?
Oh, yeah.
The Airbus capabilities.
That's what I was saying. I could go back to the 70s. The Tornado could fly at night through valleys without any hands-on. That's not the issue. That's been there all. But I would argue that the very point of that, the fact you can do that, I would disagree. I would say there is a purpose of having the man, the woman interface at the decision point, because of, I would really question whether the AI is such a developed position where that is totally reliable, and I would really question that at this point in time. One could see that changing, satellite imagery, everything that goes with it.
What sort of time frames?
Yeah, well, it certainly can be done, but whether that is the most reliable, I think flexibility is an important thing, and I would argue in defence, peacekeeping operations is the majority. Actual operations is the minority. So I would say just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done. I personally come from the camp of liking the human interface, even though it's the weak spot.
In terms of developing that, who has primacy? Is it the human or the machine? And is there always a case the human will always have primacy because there's an off button?
One would hope so.
Will there ever be a case where the machine will have primacy? Skynet.
I can say in manufacturing, definitely we appreciate the human part of it. And I can just come back to the part of the trains. We also monitor the London subway. And you can imagine it's nothing more painful if the door's not working. A simple thing as a door. We have rush hour, the door doesn't open and close. It's always a point of delay. And as I said, we have a lot of data scientists working and monitoring this data. And honestly, at the beginning, we weren't so successful with predicting what's really wrong. Until we got 20 people in which built trains, commissioned trains, and did service. Because sometimes there are easy things like, somebody's, with the trains packed and, somebody pushing against the door, the image or the sensor would take, something's wrong with the door. But when you have those experienced people in the room and say, well, don't worry about it, that it comes and goes, the analytics are saying, well, there's something wrong with the door, and those guys are saying, no, that's perfectly fine, you can go ahead. So the human element still probably because the artificial intelligence is not working perfectly at this point in time. It's still a great component. At least we value it very much. Experience at this point in time cannot replace in the manufacturing world.
I think there's a difference between the ability to do things in an automated way. No issue with that at all. I mean, that's on the rise, and it's been on the rise for many, many years and will continue and accelerate. A lot of the functionality that's reliable functionality will be performed by machines. But I'm talking about moral-based decisions. That isn't quite as simple. And so I would argue that, that's the bit. Automation is all around us and is advancing.
Once we bring in decision making.
Yeah.
Perhaps refreshing to hear that humans are still needed. Get some questions.
While the mic's going, I'm going to tell a funny story about humans and machines. So I was out in Zimbabwe with the army, and they were testing new frequency hopping modems, so they had some scientists on the ground. And these modems kept having to go back to the scientists because they kept failing. There were outages in the field, and they couldn't work this out. They were perfectly in the lab, in the field, they failed. And the reason they were failing was because when you switched on these frequency hopping modems, a random amount of lights came on, and the soldiers were betting on how many lights would come on when they switched it off. So they're switching it off and back on again and winning money. So I think it's a great story, example of cutting-edge technology at that time meets soldier.
That's real life.
Real life.
Excellent. I like that anecdote.
Thank you. Brendan Fennell, BAE Garden Island, Sydney. I think in defence we're quite comfortable with disruptive technologies that disrupt an enemy's capability, or indeed in business those that disrupt a competitor's business model. My question for the panel is, as large businesses, how do we embrace those innovations which disrupt our own business model or our own processes?
Maybe I take a quick start.
Let's go.
I can tell you a story where we as Siemens learned a very, very important lesson. It was the mid-90s, and part of our business was telecommunication at this point in time. And we made a lot of money with it. It was 1/3 of our total volume. And the board member made a significant comment: there will be never a conversion of voice and data. Even this technology already existed in some of our labs. He said this will never happen. And at the end of the day, it took all the business away, and we had to replace 1/3 of our business. By not listening to what happens in the marketplace. And I think that was a very big lesson for us.
All right, I think we'll move. We're getting towards the end of the session. I think first lady there, and then we'll get one last question down the front.
Thanks. Karen Jansen, also at ANU. And I guess I want to question sort of a theme that we've been hearing a little bit about, which is the right phrase to be using disruptive technology, or is it disruption? Because to me, a lot of what we're talking about are the social and ethical and human elements. And by calling it disruptive technology, are we privileging the technology and the product over what's happening with its use and impact?
I agree,
It's actually not a bad way to frame the discussion.
I mean, I would also agree with that. I mean, I think I've tried to imply that all the way along. I'll tell a little story, if I may, very quickly. I'm wearing quite an unfashionable tie. Now, I happen to collect aviation ties. Now, this is an original captain's tie from Concorde. Okay, some of you possibly don't even know what Concorde is, but it was the first supersonic airliner. Wasn't the only one that was tried to be built, but it was, I think, the only successful one. And when Concorde was produced, I happened to be part of Concorde. It pushed the boundaries in many directions: high-strength materials, high-temperature materials, aerodynamics, engine performance, the whole works. And for a while, of course, it captured the imagination, but it didn't really meet, I think, the requirement, and it didn't last. It happened to be an accident that killed it, but it would have died anyway. Will technology will anything like that really happen again? It probably will, not in my lifetime, but I would argue it will only happen if there's a real requirement, a real need, and an economic model. That's the only way that's really going to happen. I don't think it will be in my lifetime, but I think it will occur again because travel is very important to people. But I think it comes down to people at the end of whether something will be successful and what it means. And at the time of Concorde, there was lots of protocol problems. You know, the US didn't want it landing, noise, pollution, etc. So I think there's some important lessons from the past in terms of how you address that. I'm with you. I think, you know, it's not so much disruptive technology, apart from adding them up and joining them together. It's more about the impact on society and how you manage that.
Yeah.
That's my personal view.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting, I think, to track moving forward is if there's disruption happening, what's the percentage it relies on technology? So, you know, you look at Uber, the disruptor in the taxi field, but it's heavily reliant on technology. You look at Google, the disruptor in the market, they're a marketing company, not a technology company, they're a disruptor in the market field. They're technology. So I'm wondering, you know, whether we will actually have any more disruption that doesn't, you know, 80% rely on technology be something to keep a watching brief on, I think.
Okay, and we'll get a question here from this lady, and looking at the time, I suspect we might be able to go a little bit over. Yep, go.
Thank you. Pip Weirderman here from the Office of the Cybersecurity Special Advisor. I want to flip the conversation a little bit away from perhaps the negative connotation with the term disruptive and actually talk about the term enhancement. I'd like the panel to talk, perhaps going back to the conversation that we were having about where the human element fits in and touching on the concept that was raised very earlier about the concept of the enhanced soldier. Where do we actually see disruptive technologies turning into something that really enhances the human capability? So jumping on, say, the amount of data that's available, individual humans are not capable of keeping that amount of data in their heads, but AI is. So the person sitting and making the decision on top of an AI-produced analytic is in a much better position than perhaps having a number of analysts providing that information. I'd just like the panel's views on that.
Who wants to kick this one off?
I can't comment on soldiers or army in general. I'll take your point, and I still believe, you know, at this point in time, as I said, for the train technology, you still need humans to make the final decision, the final call. We are not at the place where we can 100% trust a recommendation. And I usually say, as a manager and as a leader, you know, if a decision is black and white, Excel can make the decision for me. If the result is a little bit more gray, and you still can get gray results, then you have to make a decision based on your experience. That would be my take on that.
Another win for humans.
Yeah, it's probably more into your field, the soldier of the future. But I'm just wondering if your commander in the field would suddenly be getting a whole load more data sources available to them rather than the classic military intel and all the rest of it. You know, they're going to use the internet. They'll actually trigger access to other databases that aren't normally available to them to mine that information to give the commander in the field a better picture of what's going on. You know, he'll be able to launch information attacks, information warfare attacks from his tent in the field, perhaps to disrupt supply lines in the back. I don't know. But, you know, my sort of impression is the commander uses traditional military intel. In today's world with the AIs, it's going to mine the internet of information. It's going to be a super Google, perhaps. And he'll have that on his you know, touch screen table. That's, you know, soldier protected, so it's waterproof and all the rest of it, and you know, can stand being stolen.
I think you already know the answer to this.
3D holographic.
3D holographic, yeah.
I think we're pretty close to it already.
Yeah.
Okay, and I did just one more. I think we've got a question up here. I saw a hand raised just before, just to round out the session. You as well? Yep. Yeah, just, I did see a hand go up here. Oh, okay. Was it, okay, sorry, my apologies. Gentleman down the front.
Thank you. Roxley McLennan, Rolls-Royce. Just harking back to that point about most disruptive technologies that we were talking about are the IT or cyber or information technology. So leaning a little bit more towards the mechanical, and unsurprisingly, I suppose, I'm talking about aerospace propulsion. The invention of the aeroplane was clearly disruptive, changed the way we did business, particularly in warfare terms. But the development of the engine over more than 100 years has actually been fairly steady. There's been a couple of step changes, and my definition of disruptive is a step change in something. Certainly the invention of the jet engine was such a step change. Question is, what is the next one? Is it hypersonics? The idea of a missile coming in at Mach 8 is pretty concerning. Or are we going to step in the field of passenger transport, perhaps to suborbital flight, or, you know, where are we going? Are we just going to keep doing the same thing, or are we going to do something dramatically different?
I mean, it's not a new topic. In fact, I mean, you'll probably even know the projects that have been developed over history. I mean, HOTOL, you know, using the spin of the Earth rather than just using, you know, there's quite a lot of this is quite a well-trod path, and I would say we will come back to it, but I think we'll only come back to it when there is an economic case to do it. I'm not sure it will be in my lifetime, but you know, there's been quite a lot of work previously being done by, you know, BAE in the UK had a project running on this. Boeing has had one. So I think it's possible, but only if the demand is there and the real need. It's feasible to do it, and as we know, in terms of satellite launching, there's all sorts of developments happening in even private space at the moment. So, I mean, it's very, very interesting. But I would argue I'm not sure it's the most important, because, you know, is it really a problem having to travel? You know, I go to the UK, it takes me 24 hours. It's not a big deal. So, you know, speed is not the big driver. For me personally, I think it's more to do with the volume of transport and the most feasible way, an economic way of doing that.
We did finally get to space, albeit briefly.
We are working with Airbus on electrical propulsion. We have a project going on there. And I think when you ask another topic, I think additive manufacturing could have a significant impact. Because I just saw in our labs, we can now produce shapes which you never could do with milling, drilling, all those kind of things. And that can improve the components, the weight, the shape, all those kind of things. So I think there are a couple of technologies that, in particular in aviation, will or can make a difference going forward.
Wonderful.
I might stand up because this is perhaps more of a comment than anything else. For the last 20 years in Australia, we've been worrying about the demographic revolution, the shock that's coming from declining birth rates, ageing population, rapidly ageing population, declining rate of growth of workforce, increase in some countries, declining workforce numbers. And that's driven a lot of policy. For 20 years, Australia's had a policy which has essentially been about population participation and productivity. Population meant encouraging immigration. Participation meant keeping people in the workforce longer, getting people who are in marginal groups out of the workforce, back into the workforce. Productivity meant reform. Yet, if you think about the next 20 years, we might not have the problems of the demographic revolution, but we might have the problems of the employment revolution. Yeah. It won't be a case of too few workers, which has been our fear for a long time, but a case where technical change, disruptive technologies, digital technologies actually mean that we have to find jobs for people, not find people for jobs. Personally, I'm very optimistic how it will turn out, because I do think we'll finish up with higher productivity, shorter working weeks and better lives. Technology tends to do that. It's just the transition is sometimes a bit bumpy.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Now, before I move to wrap up the session and thank our panellists, are there any final quick comments that anyone wants to add to the discussion? Just got a gentleman there, I think.
Well, like a series of points. It's interesting you talked about disruptive technologies. If you look back, Andrew Tesler, Oxford Economics. If you look back at, say, the 19th century, it wasn't the fact you had rails that allowed trains to proceed, because we had rails for hundreds of years. is once you had steel rails plus a steam engine, you put them together and things happen. One of the important points that economists like Robert Gordon or Tyler Cowen have said is actually we're not living for a technological revolution, it's a stagnation. Very controversial idea because we're plateauing. We can do Concord in the 70s, but we can't, it just doesn't make any economic sense. But once those things come together, and we don't know when, could be now, could be the 2020s, then things will change very rapidly. So that's something to think about. What is going to happen? What's the tipping point? Are we close to make those things happen very rapidly? When they do, it'll be like that.
Well put. Okay, well, the good news is we're approaching afternoon tea. The bad news is a discussion that is generating a lot of questions and I suspect a lot of questions that we will still be grappling with for a long time, is coming to an end. So I'll like to, at this point, thank our panel who have been very generous with their insights and their times and their time here with us. First of all, from BAE Systems, Steve Wortlock, thank you very much for your time. Stuart Mort from the Cybersecurity Division of Optus, and Michael Freeney from Siemens. If we could put our hands together to thank the panel. The good news is also this discussion will continue, as we heard later this year in October at the CPower conference. So this is, of course, only the second of 3 disruptive technology panels. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Ian Watt for your contributions today as well, and David for hosting our event today. And as I say, we've now got some afternoon tea, so I think we can continue that discussion outside. Thank you very much.